Welcome to another episode of The Dissection. Patrice Motsepe was involved in the Washington trip behind the scenes. We're still actually learning a lot and observing a lot following that infamous trip to the White House. It turns out there was one billionaire who was not in the room, but who was behind the scenes, and in a big way. Patrice Motsepe. Trump, as I said before, is a litmus paper. He's showing us who the power brokers and the power dealers are in South Africa. The men behind the politicians and also the politician businessmen, those with one foot in each world. We're beginning to see everything. That's the beauty of Donald Trump. He shows you where the booty is. He shows you where the power brokers are. He shows you where all of the people who are behind the scenes are, because he needs them to come and talk to him direct. So Patrice Motsepe, the media is reporting on how he was involved. But before we go there, an update on the story around Starlink, the change of regulations and policies. The Minister of Communications is being congratulated by other DA ministers for helping bring Starlink into South Africa. We're seeing various reports in various media houses that Starlink is coming to South Africa. But he claims the policy directives coming from him and the regulations gazetted by him had nothing to do with what the world witnessed in Washington. He's saying it's a coincidence. We know what we saw. The man whose family has been a dominant player in South African business during both apartheid and post-apartheid South Africa, Johan Rupert, asked for Starlink in the White House. 2 days later, laws were changed. We know what we saw. This is what we saw.
Johan, please.
Sorry, Mr. President, if you have to wind all of those things properly, you will see I'm the biggest target of that rebel browser. Number one for over 10 years, Mr. Malepa. In fact, the first time I met him, he was in the youth league with that gentleman. And look how he's changed.
Right.
We have too many deaths, and it's across the board. It's not only white farmers. It's across the board. And we need technological development. We need Starlink at every little police station. We need drones. I actually got drones donated for the peace parks to stop elephant and rhino poaching.
Mm-hmm.
And his predecessor stopped the importation because he said the United States would spy on us. I mean, US SpaceX, the ridicule. So if you can help us. Remember, sir, you and I lived in New York in the 70s. We never thought New York could be what it became. We need your help, sir. And we need Elon technology.
Well, one of the real areas of support is really in investments. We've got to grow our economy, because through growing the economy, we're then able to create more jobs. Because crime really thrives where there is inequality and unemployment. And that is one of the reasons that has brought us here to improve our investment relations, our trade relations, so that we can preserve the number of jobs that your companies have created in South Africa. By virtue of what we export to you, we are able to create up to 500,000 jobs.
On a side note, Ronald Lamula, how long have you been talking to Johan Rupert that he uses you as an example in the Oval Office of a reformed and changed problematic black man? There's a story to be told that you want to run for leader of the ANC, but you're being pointed to by the richest man in South Africa as his good boy. I mean, it's a story for another day, but we know what we saw. 1 day later, we saw multiple reports about how Starlink now has a path to entering South Africa after Elon Musk was complaining that he's not being allowed because he's black, he's not being allowed, etc., etc. So the Minister of Communications is saying, look, forget what you saw in the White House. Forget what you heard. Forget the timeline. Don't worry about all of that. He's denied that he's changing policy and regulations for Elon Musk and Starlink. And he told various media houses that this is nothing to do with Musk. Solimalatsi denied that the directive was drafted to create a special regime for Musk and said that the timing of the publication was pure coincidence. The minister said, the policy direction is given under the Electronic Communications Act. The Minister of Communications and Digital Technologies has the power to give policy directions under that act, and that is what I've done. There was no political pressure. We began working on this early as last year when we issued the intention to do a policy directive. The timing is an issue that will have different people having different opinions. That's what he said. Parliament's Communications Committee, which is led by the ANC's Kusela Diko, has summoned Solimalatsi to appear before it on Tuesday to explain what they say appears to be a contravention of the Electronic Communications Act and is in favor of Elon Musk's satellite-based internet service. He has accepted that invitation and will have to actually wait and see what that committee will say, what will happen in that committee meeting. Committee meetings can get lit. It's Sunday, the 25th of May, as I'm recording this, Africa Day, by the way, although that's a story for another video, right? The progress of Africa in and of itself. But Tuesday, we'll have to see what happens, and I'm sure it'll be an exciting committee meeting. The last committee meeting where there was an issue that was highly controversial, we saw an EFF member of parliament, none other than the Cater Undertaker himself, Sitlelonzi, being kicked out because he was raising issues about the appointment of the son of the Minister of Minerals, Gwede Mantashe's son, and we saw that being reversed by the Higher Education Minister. She then restarted the process of appointment of SETA chairpersons and SETA board members, SETA, right? So that's where things are in relation to the Starlink story. You're waiting for the parliamentary committee meeting in Tuesday. But I want to ask you, let's talk in the comments. What do you think about the minister's explanation? Do you buy that it was merely a coincidence? Personally, I'm going to tell you what I think. I don't think so. I don't buy the coincidence story. I think that Elon Musk knew what he was doing when he withdrew the Starlink license application in January of 2025. Because remember, Starlink was actually participating in the application process, making motivations. Then they withdrew. Just abruptly, they withdrew. I think Musk was working on a different pressure strategy to get South Africa to bend to his will. And I think he succeeded in that strategy. I think he used his presence in the Trump administration's U.S. Department of Government Efficiency, that Doge department, his strong relationship with Trump, because he contributed massively to Donald Trump's re-election campaign. And also, he used his social media platforms such as Twitter. We saw that Grok was being manipulated to actually push particular narratives. We saw Elon Musk himself retweeting multiple narratives, actually advancing the agenda. We saw them trying to make this whole thing about the song that Julius Malema sang, even though Julius Malema has 9% in parliament, even though we've seen a decline over the last few years in the number of people dying on farms, particularly white farmers, even though that number has been going down for the last 15 to 20 years. He's made that central. We started seeing right-wing voices, Ernest Roots, appearing on prominent American podcasts. There was no reason whatsoever for Ernest Roots to actually be on the radar of Tucker Carlson unless Tucker Carlson was asked by somebody who was doing a favor. Now Ben Shapiro is talking about this. Now all of these other people are talking about this. Rob Hersov all of a sudden is appearing on a whole bunch of podcasts. The Patrick David podcast. This was a This was a coordinated communication program, and serious questions have to be asked about who was doing all of that coordination behind the scenes. But it's no coincidence to me that all of these things were happening. Seeing all of these people on all of these podcasts, knowing that Trump watches those things. We saw the executive order of February 7. The DA also traveled to the United States at the end of February, right? Around about the same time that AfriForum had also traveled. We have no idea if they were given clues about what it would take to make the Trump administration back down on this issue. Based on all of that circumstantial evidence that we have all been witnessing, I don't think that there's such a thing as a coincidence as it relates to this Starlink issue. I don't think there's a coincidence in politics and in business. I think most of the things that happen at the time when they happen as a result of coordination, not as a result of coincidence. I don't buy that story, but we'll see what happens in Parliament, right? So now let's get back to Mutsepe and his involvement in that May 21 trip and that May 21 meeting, rather. Sunday Times is reporting that Patrice Motsepe played an instrumental role in developing the government's strategy and tactics ahead of President Cyril Ramaphosa's meeting with the US President Donald Trump. Apparently, Motsepe was part of a government delegation which was led by Ramaphosa's envoy to the US, Mcebisi Jonas, and the International Relations Director, Zain Dango, that traveled to Qatar to seek advice from the country's leaders on how best to prepare for the meeting with Trump. The delegation was apparently one of the teams the South African government deployed to cover all angles ahead of the meeting. There was also a team from big business that worked behind closed doors to facilitate the talks. So this meeting was being strategized by billionaires, strategized by big business, facilitated by big business. The president is appointing business people to do stuff that ought to be done by elected officials. According to the sources who spoke to Sunday Times, Motsepe has a relationship with Trump as he and his wife move in the same social circles in the arts and in business. It's not the first time that he has been roped in to assist and smooth things over, said the source. He went with the president when he had his state visit to the UAE. So the delegation's trip to Qatar is believed to have helped ease the tensions with the US, given the special relationship between the two countries. Qatar just gave Trump a luxurious jet to be used as Air Force One. So all of that, we don't have a jet to give you, all of that stuff may actually have just been an inside chat, because already they were talking to the Qataris, and already the Qataris apparently would have sent an SMS or WhatsApp message or whatever is being used to say to Trump, talk to our guys over there, listen to our boys, listen to Rupert, listen to Johan, and see what you can do. To me, this story is believable, but it's worrying. This story shows that Patrice Motsepe is one of the power brokers. Like what I was saying, Trump is a litmus paper, but also that he was strategic enough to know that his presence in the Oval Office would be a red flag to some people. So rather than going with Rupert, he went to Qatar, where you wouldn't see the videos of what he was discussing, where you wouldn't see him making particular deals, compromises, concessions. Because what were they talking about with the Qataris that made the Trump administration say, oh, okay, we won't be hard on them. We won't give them the Zelensky treatment. Give them half Zelensky. HZ, half Zelensky. Think about that chess. Think about the strategy. I mentioned in a recent video that Patrice Motsepe has a relationship with Johan Rupert. Each of them own 37% of the Blue Bulls company, the one that owns the Pretoria Rugby Club, right? There have been reports as well that Patrice Motsepe is considering a run for the presidency of South Africa by first running for the presidency of the ANC in their 2027 elective conference. I mean, look at the number of reports that we've been seeing about Patrice in the last month, in the month of May alone. So look at this. Headline after headline after headline after headline. Just look. There have been multiple reports to the effect that it seems that he's going for it. These reports are piling up, right? He's also currently in the process of delisting his business empire. That will give him a huge veil of anonymity, which will enable him to hide his business partners, their interests, something that will prevent the public from knowing who got what if he becomes president, right? All of these things then put into trust. They don't have to disclose. Even if he goes to parliament, you will never know the deals that are being made. Democracy, they say, dies in darkness. So I said this is worrying because of two reasons. Number one, it seems like the oligarchs are taking actions that impact legislation and governance. But the oligarchs are not elected officials. The problem with having oligarchs playing these roles is that you can't hold a billionaire accountable. You can't hold Rupert accountable. He owns ENCA. Those journalists, some of them were being very aggressive in the American media. They won't be aggressive to Rupert. They won't even look for Rupert. He owns ENCA. On the other side, the other billionaires have shares and have ownership in all of the big publications. Who's going to hold them accountable? They don't report to parliament. They don't respond to the media. You can't vote them out. And equally, a lot of them have been donating profusely to certain political parties, which means even in parliament, they've created a buffer. They have defenders, oligarch defenders, ODs, oligarch defense team, ODT, right there in the parliament, working for them. Two, and I think something even more worrying, there is a perpetuation of the extractive economy as a result of these relationships. I've been talking about this book for a while. Why Nations Fail. The Origins of Power, Prosperity, and Poverty by James Robinson and Darren Asimoglu, both PhD professors. From the first time I read this book, I was convinced by the arguments and the explanations. These men have PhD in economics, and they gave us in this book their magnus opus. And by the way, they have now won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences for this book in particular and others, because they've explained the fundamental thesis of why nations fail thoroughly, comprehensively. This book requires multiple reads in order for you to get the gist of it. I actually would recommend that this book be read as part of the history class and part of the economics class in high schools. But if I could make it mandatory, I would put this in LO. Make it a real subject. Give them this book right here. So in chapter 3 of this book, Why Nations Fail, this Nobel Prize winning book, but I was recommending it, by the way, before they won any Nobel Prize. So if you want to know the quality of recommendation, you can see. It's a 2012 book, but it's so relevant even now. In chapter 3, they explain the relationship between politicians and businesses in an extractive economy. South Africa falls into their definition of an extractive economy and has the problems that they identify. They explain why politicians in these nations do not build schools or fix public education, which is, I'm sure, one of the things you're wondering about. All these South Africa's richest men, all of this money, they're not building schools, fixing schools, except for the ones that serve the elite and the middle class, like the, Advitex and the Curos and all of that. Those are not schools for the masses. They're schools for a very small slice of South African society that can afford to pay those school fees. So you probably wondered that. I've wondered that. And when I read this book, I got the answer. Patrice Motsepe, his dad built a primary school and a high school, I think it was, in the other book by Jane Smith. She mentions that. But he didn't build any schools. Same thing that this book is identifying. His dad believed in education, but apparently the man doesn't share his dad's belief. So if you're wondering, why don't the billionaires build schools? Even Musk and all of these guys, Bill Gates, why don't they build schools? It's because they don't want to, because it hurts their business model. So in page 74, they explain that inclusive economic institutions are those that allow and encourage participation by the great mass of people in economic activities that make best use of their talents and skills and that enable individuals to make choices as they wish. One of the main engines of prosperity that they identify in an inclusive economy is education, because it creates a level playing field. They explain on page 75, which is where I'm really going to, guys, I go to church. But I'm not trying to preach to you like that. I'm just trying to show you the information. They explain at page 75 that inclusive economic institutions require economic opportunities, not just for the elites, but for a broad cross-section of society. They talk about how the state is a key player for providing for that as well on page 76 of the book. Right. So the opposite of an inclusive economy is an extractive economy, and institutions in those kind of economies are designed to extract incomes and wealth from one subset of society to the benefit of a different subset, from the masses to the billionaires, the oligarchs in this case, right? Page 78, they say here at page 78, right here. I don't know if you can see this. Page 78. What does page 78 say? The low education level of poor countries is caused by economic institutions that fail to create incentives for parents to educate their children, and by political institutions that fail to induce the government to build, finance, and support schools and the wishes of parents or children. The price these nations pay for low education of their population is high. It's called high unemployment of the youth, 60%. Right, between the ages of 15 to 34. That's the source of the problem. Minister of Finance will announce a bunch of things in the budget. I'm going to do a special budget review episode. Doesn't really change the congestion of classrooms in the schools, even though he says he's trying to get more teachers. Nothing's happening. 97% of the schools in the Eastern Cape have no libraries, but they want you to believe that they're fixing or care about education. They don't care. It's part of the extractive economy. So they explain, right, that the political institutions, because you may be wondering, well, sure, but what has this got to do with the businessmen? They explain that the political institutions are entwined with the economic institutions. A business in an extractive nation is not fighting or fixing the problem. They are part of the system. Page 81, let me go there quickly. Here's what they say, page 81, right? Extractive political institutions, right here, concentrate power in the hands of a narrow elite, and place few constraints on the exercise of this power. Economic institutions are then structured by this elite to extract resources from the rest of society. Extractive economic institutions thus naturally accompany extractive political institutions. In fact, they must inherently depend on extractive political institutions for their survival. When you read this book right here, it talks, this one is called ANC Billionaires, Big Capital's Gambit and the Rise of the Few. It talks about and helps you to explain and helps you understand that big business actually orchestrated the transition to democracy, and they managed it in such a way that they would still be able to keep making profits post-apartheid. They started making moves when their profits were hurt, and they orchestrated moves to make sure that their profits would be protected post-1994. BEE, the one that they say they hate. Oh, BEE, we hate that thing. It was their idea. Big business came up with the concept of BEE to pick a few winners from the black community that were not radical, that were not against capitalism, sprinkle those on the cake of their economic dominance of South Africa, and then be able to continue to make profits without reforming. That's why many people are right when they say that CODESA failed. It wasn't designed to fix that side of the equation. Big business did a lot under apartheid, worked with the Nationalist Party and worked with the colonial parties as well in the period of colonialism. They were drafting some of the labor legislation. They were part and parcel of everything that has happened in the last 150 years in South Africa, and they have stood to benefit and orchestrated some of the biggest moves. The book, this one here, ANC Billionaires, Peter du Toit, explains that in the 1980s, there were 4 families effectively dominating and controlling 86% of the JSE. 4 families. The Oppenheimers through Anglo, the Ruperts through Rembrandt, the Menel and Hester family through Anglo-Val, the Gordons through Liberty. These were the 4 families who were chowing the South African economy. All of that apartheid stuff, they were making the profits. All of that period in history, they were part and parcel of it, making big money through that, right? So when you look at the main players on the JSE in 2025, it's the same names of the same companies. Some have been renamed, some have been split up and restructured. Remgro, Naspers, Sanlam, all of these companies. You look at all of the mining companies. When you look at the party donors, it's the same families, the same Oppenheimers that led the orchestration of the fall of apartheid, are the same Oppenheimers who were giving 50 million to Inkatha Freedom Party, I lost our count of how many millions were given to the DA. So you get to understand something that page 81 of the book is trying to explain. Because what the book says on page 81, it says the following: the synergistic relationship between economic and political institutions introduces a strong feedback loop. Political institutions enable the elites controlling power to choose economic institutions with few constraints or opposing forces. They also enable the elites to structure future political institutions and their evolution. Extractive economic institutions, in turn, enrich the same elites, and their economic wealth and power help consolidate their political dominance. That is what is the barrier to improved education in South Africa, to improved access to small business funding in South Africa. This symbiotic relationship between extractive political institutions and extractive economic institutions. The oligarchs are not part of the problem, of the solution rather. They're not part of the solution. They are part of the problem. Everything that you complain about, they built it with the politicians that they also complain about. The oligarchs are in a very interesting position. Trump is exposing them though. Trump is exposing them because when you're complaining, the oligarchs come and say, yeah, man, these politicians are corrupt. When it's election time, they donate to those politicians who are corrupt to keep them in power. When it's time to do business deals, they do business deals with the relatives of those politicians. When it's time to go to UAE, they go. It's them. They're the ones doing it. But when you're complaining, they come and they're like, yeah, what's happening? Crime is bad. Education, only we fix education. That's skills problem. They don't want you to be skilled because you're going to compete with them. Did you know that South African banks are ranked in the top 20 in the world, but only number 77 in terms of venture capital funding and 96 in terms of small business funding? Did you know that? Explain that to me. The guy who owns the bank doesn't want competitors. The guy's Time Bank, FNB, all of these banks, they don't give loans easily. And they don't do it because it's part and parcel of why nations fail. It's part and parcel of why nations fail. Please read the book. It's an important book. If you're interested in an in-depth book dissection, join the book lab, which is part of our members only section for interesting deep dives into various books. All of these books, we discussed them, Patrice Motsepe, Ramaphosa, all of that stuff. More is on the way. Some stuff is already currently there. You're going to have an enriching experience, and it helps support the channel. So Mutsepe is involved. Mutsepe wants to be the president. Question then becomes, will another billionaire fix the problems, or will we see more of the same? What do you think about Mutsepe's involvement? What do you think about everything we've discussed in this video? The minister denying that it had anything to do with Starlink, the meeting in Washington, and the permissions he's giving now. Let's have a conversation in the comments. I'll meet you there.